Hi, this is Nee. I'm the Marketing and Communications Specialist at CARE.
I'm Melissa. I'm one of the Violence Prevention Coordinators at CARE, and you are listening to The Narrative Project.
Hello everyone, Nee here with Melissa and some amazing colleagues to talk through our second episode of The Narrative Project. Before we get into what we will be talking about today, I'm going to let everyone introduce themselves, their pronouns if they would like, and a small description of where they are calling from. I can go ahead and get started. So my name is Nee. I use she and her pronouns, and I'm the Marketing and Communications Specialist at CARE, and I'm calling from Irvine.
Hello, everyone. My name is Melissa Bader-Huskin. I use they, them pronouns. I am calling from Mission Viejo. It's a little sunny. It's a nice day outside.
My name is Cheng. I'm one of the counselors at the Disability Service Center. My pronouns are he, him, they, and them, and I am calling from Costa Mesa, Santa Ana.
Hi, my name is Terri. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm calling from Southeast Los Angeles, and it is quite ashy here. So if you saw my car, you would wonder what was happening.
Jason Wilder, and I use he, him, his pronouns, and I'm calling from, currently it's a little cloudy, but still beautiful San Diego.
I'm very excited to get started in our conversation today. And so we're going to be exploring and discussing what it means to navigate trauma and anxiety, both as staff members and faculty members on campus, and being able to create experiences for students, how we define it, how our definitions may change through different contexts. And so with this in mind, I do want to recognize that we only have a few folks discussing these topics in this Zoom room right now. And so we are not going to cover every single context or every single definition. And so keep that in mind, that this is only a snapshot of the conversation. And we really do encourage you, as you're listening, after you listen, so on and so forth, delve into these topics with folks around you and kind of discuss what you think about what we're talking about.
With COVID-19, with the pandemic, we have had to experience a period of sheltering in place. How does this impact the way we view communities or cultivating community?
I have been in two minds about it, so to speak. So on the one hand, I really like it because I like being able to work from home. I like the fact that I am at home with my family. My family consists of my sister and my mother. That is nice to have my community here with me. Going through this whole pandemic doesn't seem so stressful because I'm with my network of support. At the same time, with regard to establishing or maintaining community outside of my nuclear family, it's been a little challenging because Zoom fatigue is real. And so even though as much as it's great to be able to see my friends online and talk to them and still feel connected to them, I'm in meetings, Zoom meetings, all day. It gets to a point where I just don't want to be on Zoom anymore. You have your phone calls, you have your FaceTime, you have your Zoom calls, but after a while, it's kind of you just want to see the person. On the one hand, it helps because I'm also an introvert, I say by nature, even though I'm a learned extrovert. Being at home is cool, but after a while, I want to be around my friends and my other family too.
Terri, you brought up a great idea, talking about outside of your nuclear family, and the thing that I started realizing, again, living at home for the moment with my parents, the dynamic amongst communities with my demographic, you kind of notice a shift where at first everyone wanted to go out, they wanted to hang out with friends, they wanted to believe the going out wasn't going to harm anybody, and then you started seeing this great emergence of people on social media and their presence becoming more and more expressive, to where then it backtracks and you see people wanting to be on social media a lot less and starting to become introverted because of the conversations or the level in which these conversations are being brought up. It seems as though there wasn't a single place you could go that you weren't hearing something, seeing something. One of the cool things that we're starting to see is people are, growing and stronger in fields that they wouldn't necessarily, again, for myself, being at home, it's not my wheelhouse, but I'm learning to be comfortable with. A lot of students at UCI and a lot of my peers are echoing that same sentiment where we're growing in different ways through the pandemic.
That's a great thing you said, growing and learning. There are some people, their immediate communities, whether it be family or significant other, isn't the healthiest community for them, that does exacerbate some of their trauma or is just an unhealthy environment, that they heavily relied on their outside communities, living away from family or whoever, and being able to interact with different communities and groups. And so learning to adjust that to not be face to face, but maybe on Zoom. Terri, you mentioned the Zoom fatigue. This feel isn't the same when you're next to somebody or across.
Yes.
And so that is a huge factor that people assume communities are always positive. However, sometimes they're negative, and that is playing a huge factor. If you look at domestic abuse, violence, child abuse, you know, these people, they're outside communities to help them get through it, to find advice and support of how do I navigate, what do I say, or who do I talk to communicate these things. The care office and a lot of people on campus have done a great effort to remind students, yes, we are not physically here, but this community support is here for you. Please reach out to us, you know, via phone call, email, Zoom. And those constant reminders, I know it may seem tiring, but it's some students just forget and they may feel hopeless. So, you know, those communities are super important in helping our staff, students, and everyone grow.
It has me thinking about too of just how conversations have changed, of like checking in and things like that. I know just with myself personally, before we started working remote and Zoom fatigue became very real and all of these things, I was usually the person where I would be like, I can text you right now, but I don't want to talk on the phone because I've been talking all day and I don't want to talk anymore. And now it's the exact opposite, where I'm like, if you want to speak with me, you got to call me, because I don't want to be looking at another screen. And so it's been a challenge of navigating, resetting these boundaries that just look different now, and navigate that space. And you can come up with a lot of different perks around being remote, a lot of cons as well, and it varies from person to person. And something I've noticed is just it stretches and has shown how important these conversations around boundaries and what you need in the moment really is.
I think that obviously with everything being more digitized, everyone being on social media or Zoom being such a real thing, I think that one thing that the pandemic especially has done is it's had people and forced people to have those tough conversations, tackle problems that they otherwise put off, whether it's you go to work from 9 to 5 so you're not, dealing with the nuances of your relationship, or when we talk about kids or even schoolwork, I think that was something that both of you guys kind of brought into my head, was again that those conversations, people are forced to tap into those feelings, those frustrations, and really work through problems that otherwise would be put off.
Yeah, those conversations are super important now. I've noticed in our area, we've had students who do our application to even start the process have started sharing, like, I've been going through this experience, and now being at home with COVID has kind of been the tipping point for them, where they finally felt like they needed to get some sort of support, and they're aware, like, I can't see anybody physically, what are other options? Being at home has kind of exacerbated it. Going home to visit family for a few days is definitely going back and living with them for another 6 months or a year is different. If you look at the media, Dak Prescott, NFL quarterback for the Dallas Cowboys, his brother completed suicide. We're going to talk about mental health and, the COVID thing, and now that piece has exacerbated his mental health. And the COVID experience exacerbated his brother's mental health. So those things that some people take for granted or just aren't aware of in other people's shoes, it shows that this hits everybody. Dak Prescott's multi-million-dollar man, still a human being who can experience some sort of trauma and need a community behind them to be able to express their feelings and get the help that they need.
Our needs consistently change. And same with our students, right? We see one day they might need something that looks like this, and then the next day it might be totally different. Found myself personally to fluctuate in that way too. There may be weeks where I'll tell our team, email is great. And then there are days where it's just like, I just can't. I need to step away from that because it's increasing my anxiety. and really communicating that. And sometimes on top of trying to support not only your team, but also your students.
I think it also makes you assess or reassess like who's in your community. Who do you have around you? What's important to you? Are those people supporting you? Are those people happy for you when you do well? You really get a chance to see, because you're not face to face, who's calling you, who's checking up on you, who's willing to listen to you when they ask you, oh, how's it going? And you say, it's not really going that great. And then do they just kind of roll over it, pass over it, or do they actually try to engage and get to find out like what's going on with you? It definitely has enabled an opportunity to assess who's in your community, who's in your network of support, and if you have to kind of let people go.
Would hate to label it and say that it's such a defining moment in, friendships, relationships, and whatnot, but it truly does, I think, really show one's character. I've always tried to be someone that reaches out, just to make sure, regardless of circumstances, but more so now than ever, right? I'm sending random messages to people just being like, hey, like, saw you posted a photo of your cat. Like, how's life going? How are you doing? Those small things. And again, when I get those texts, it means the world to me. Not necessarily the first person you would think would text you, but somebody saying, hey, I'm in your corner, I'm there for you. And Cheng, when we bring up mental illnesses, right now is a very real time for those thoughts, those intrusive thoughts to fester. One of the biggest things that my parents always taught me growing up that has literally like shaped the way I live my life is you don't know what somebody's going through. Everybody's fighting their own battles that nobody knows about. To understand that we're all going through something, whether it's the pandemic, whether it's personal issues with family, friends, you name it, that especially right now when we kind of talk about the whole idea of self-care, community care.
It goes beyond just students. As staff members, if we don't take care of ourselves and our community is not healthy, we're not going to be able to help our students.
Amen.
As much as we want to say, like, we can put that aside, just at some point, it's the last straw that broke the camel's back. As a whole thing, Jason, you said, and Terri, when someone checks in on you, or even this political climate we're talking about, if you have friends that are willing to discuss with you and hear you out, they may not agree with you, you still feel a little bit better, like, okay, this person listened to me and understood me. Yes, we did not agree 100%, but you truly felt that like somebody was hearing for you. That may open the door for you to get some other support that you just didn't even think about. And, Nii, you said, one day it's this, the next day it's that. Jason too, it's like not everyone has the same treatment plan. Not everything works the same way, and not everyone is going through the same thing. And from face value, it looks similar, but deep down inside, everyone experiences differently. I think Shannon Sharp said a quote today. It's like boiling water. How come you get two different outcomes? When you boil an egg, it gets hard, and when you cook a potato, it gets soft. Still boiling water, but you have two different outcomes. And that's thinking about in everyone's life. Whether you're non-binary, male, female, however you identify, I could lay out the same scenario, and every scenario, each person is responding differently. And so we have to be fluid and adaptive too as staff members, working with everyone, and students are learning that too at a quicker pace. For me, I got to have life experiences spread out to learn to be who I am today. A lot of these students, Jason, like you're getting a crash course in a lot of things. Things that should have taken 10 years, you're doing it in the first 6 months or the first year. Community is even more important now than ever.
I'm aged a little bit. I just wanted the quote that I was talking about earlier from Robin Williams is that everyone you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about. Be kind always. That is a perfect summary.
You all have me thinking too of like with who we define our communities as and like all these different life experiences and things like that. I'm thinking about how we're different people in different groups sometimes. Not always, but most of the time you're going to show up a little bit differently. And now a lot of times we're finding we're in the same space as we're interacting with those different groups. If you're at home with your family around you and you don't typically show a part of yourself to your family, how do you navigate on Zoom with a group of people that know this information about you, or you're comfortable with having certain conversations with some people but not with others, and navigating the space of not being able to code switch if you don't ever leave a certain space that you might be trying to switch out of.
I struggle with that, like culturally, because yeah, like you said, you switch on one thing. Like I may talk to you differently than Terry and Jason, and I think I've learned like, okay, you know what? I don't want to judge another person, assuming like, okay, you're always my funny friend, so I'm only going to use you when I need as funny. I also need to give you an opportunity to maybe be that one friend too. That hey, I can talk to you about a deeper subject, and trial and error, you learn. Okay, maybe you aren't that person, or holy cow, I didn't know you could be this. But that's my own bias because I didn't see it that way. Shelter in place has helped me to, because there are like, sometimes we just get stuck in our habits. You know who to go to for certain things. You want to talk shop, talk to this person. Want to talk about clothes, like we pick and choose. And now it's kind of helped like, okay, because not everyone's always readily available, especially if they have children, they're taking care of someone, that sometimes you have to lean on whoever is available. And then it's kind of like for me teaching me like, okay, I have to give this person also an opportunity because I want the same from them.
I think it also too, it emphasizes like a particular type of truth about yourself in a way. I'm at home, so I can't compartmentalize the spaces that I'm in. I'm in one space. Being at home provides me with a certain type of comfort to be able to be a little bit more authentic than if I was in the workspace. I would lean on the survival mechanism that I have of the code switching, right? But at home, in my comfortable space, I don't necessarily have to lean on that so much because I can choose to show you me, or I can choose to not show you me. And that's like literal and figurative. I feel like it's more of a choice versus a have to, if I can say that. I'm in control of it versus like in a workspace, it's one of those things where it's like you do because you need to in order for you to navigate the space. But I don't need to navigate the space. I'm comfortable in this space, so I can just be me.
I like that idea of you're not trying to navigate getting comfortable in a space that you're unfamiliar with. There is more choice there. I like how you mentioned that.
I know in the last episode we talked about safe spaces, but I think that ties in perfectly between the two. Is one of the things I brought up is safe spaces typically are, again, places like a home, a church, a school, but also, especially now, it can be internal. It's, self-reflective. It's, you can be your own safe space at times. And I think that, exactly what you brought up, Terri, is, getting good with yourself, getting to choose and hold the power to say, hey, listen, I can show you all of me or none of me. I think that, taking ownership, taking control of your life and your identity and saying, again, this is who I am. I'm unapologetically me is
Exactly.
something that
Exactly.
especially right now is so important to lean into, and I'm glad you brought that up.
I think you hit the nail on the head. You can just be unapologetic, especially now with regard to the social situation that's going on around us. There is a need for safe space. There is a need to be unapologetic, especially, I'll speak for myself as a Black person. Like, the time has come where I have said, I'm not going to be nothing else but me. And if people don't like it, that's too bad. And I'm at home, so I feel encouraged to do that. I feel empowered to do that because I'm at home and I have that space where it's like, you can't see me. I can't, I don't have to be in your space. I don't have to see your body language. I don't have to see your facial expressions. I don't have to spend half of my time reading your nonverbals in order for me to determine how am I going to relate to you. I can just be.
Thanks for sharing that, Terri. I was just thinking about what you said, Terri, and also what you said earlier, Mel, about bleeding in your spaces and sometimes your loved ones seeing a different side of you as well. And it just got me thinking about boundaries, right, in different ways. Questions like, how do we create those necessary boundaries? I can't identify a specific answer for you, Mel, especially as it pertains to our different home environment, because maybe for some people it isn't a safe space, right? To share some things. But to respond to what you said, Terri, about to be, I think that's amazing. Like, just thinking about how you set your own boundaries with so many different conversations. I think it's awesome that we can engage in some of them and have a genuine dialogue and share these differences, but all at the same time, when it harms you and when it hurts you, and you allowing yourself like, hey, I don't want to engage in this type of conversation because I know that it's going to hurt me in a way where that person may not understand, you gave yourself permission to do that. That should always be okay.
Just to put it in context, like I feel like in a way, it's like I have a choice, but I don't have a choice because it's one of those things where the trauma of what is happening, it kind of has thrust me into that position where I cannot afford to not be anymore. You look at, I mean, while death is inevitable, there is too much death around me where you either have to take your power or feel helpless, right? Because of the things that you cannot control or things that seem like they're never going to end. And so that you have to find, I guess, speaking for myself, psychologically, I need to find control somewhere. The only thing I can control is me, how I react to things, how I behave, how I speak, how I relate to people. And so I have to figure out a way where I am empowering myself every day so that I don't succumb to the hopelessness of the tragedies, the fatal tragedies that are constantly providing this trauma that I don't necessarily have the tools to deal with emotionally.
When we talk about breaking down the barriers and how that looks in regards to community and how we still are able to cultivate self-care, community care through everything going on, I do think Terri brings up a good point. Bringing in my personal experiences, growing up biracials, for those of you that don't know, I'm half black, half white. For me, one of the largest things that I had to realize early on is people have perceptions. They're going to make you out. They're going to try to, pigeonhole you into a stereotype every day of the week. When we do talk about how to go about breaking down the barriers, as much as it's not the biggest solution, having a conversation, starting those conversations, being able to talk and, to bounce ideas, to bounce opinions. You look at things with the Black Lives Matter movement, when we're talking about police brutality, having those conversations regarding race, mental illness, mental health, and various other capacities is at least the start. But when we do talk about race relations currently, I think that a lot of, the disdain that people have for one another, whether it's on social media or in person, comes down to a lack of understanding or a lack of understanding someone else's perspective on the issue, not necessarily the issue itself. For someone like myself, again, being multiracial, but also volunteering with law enforcement, I'm in this weird limbo where I see both sides. And I can sit and say, my experiences and the work that I've gotten to do with the department lets me know that there's good officers out there, that there's good people out there. But the reality is, my dad growing up in North Carolina, my family, my friends, my peers, everybody has their own path. Everyone has their own, story to tell, and experiences, to where I will never fully be able to understand me, Cheng, Melissa, Terri, any of your guys' struggles 100% because they weren't mine. Again, in opening up that forum and opening up the floor to having that conversation, I can at least get there a little bit quicker or at least meet you halfway. And I think that is, one of the key things that we don't do enough of, but we always say we should.
I love that.
Me too. Terri and Jason, what both of you have talked about, I can't remember, we talked about this last episode, resilience and the amount of resilience that we can have as a community. And Terri, I loved how you said empowering yourself to be you so that you aren't sitting in that helplessness feeling that trauma can cause. I think that's such a huge thing with whether you're recognizing it within yourself or within others, and having those conversations that you're referring to, Jason, and being able to empower each other, empower ourselves to be resilient, and recognizing that resilience is not necessarily going above and beyond where you're at. Resilience is just you're back to baseline. And
Amen.
So really allowing yourself to get back to that baseline. I just thought that was something a beautiful note between what you both were talking about that I wanted to highlight.
A lot of the times holding stuff in and just sitting back is causing more harm. Getting stacked constantly with social media, one on top of the other, kind of death by 1,000 cuts, one paper
Amen.
cut, not a problem.
You
but
better
you get
preach,
1,000.
Cheng. You better preach.
So, I think that is what people, it's hard. Yeah, well, it's just one more person. No, it's not. It's one more person on top of that last person on top of that other one. And if I can't truly be who I am, or I have to hide it, that's going to harm you even more. And the fact that, Jason, you shared in your last thing, you could have had those negative stereotypes, but you helped save a young lady's life from completing suicide that changed the alter of their course by listening and being objective. And yeah, there are bad cops, just like there's racism within races, in certain races too. And so, you know, that part is it's difficult. Like, you have to be yourself. We open so many doors, and yet, you know, people don't want to do that. That could further our country or world as a whole. Think of students in general, students who come from different backgrounds. If doing something in a community can help them further their career, they could be the game changer of curing cancer. Or I'll joke around, be the person who does the vaccine for COVID, you know, because they were able to be who they were. They didn't have to have this
Right.
extra baggage that kept them from reaching their true potential. Like, I can't speak on the behalf of Terri or Jason. I'm not African American. I can only listen. And just like students who are referred from the care office, the dumbest question you can ask them: what were you wearing? Were you drinking? That has nothing to do with it. That's not the point of the context. It's what is going on. What are your challenges? What can I do to remove a barrier to get you to a better place, or even baseline, like Melissa said, back to the norm? And some people are so far off that the norm is a great thing because they can start feeling like who they want to be or who they should be.
Right.
You know, and so that is something I think all of us who are here are trying to have, that narrative, that conversation, to bring out the best in people, to learn about their differences.
Just to kind of elaborate on what Cheng said, that death by 1,000 cuts really hit home for me, just because it's like that can apply to many things. That can apply to life. In particular, for me, that just applies to the social unrest that's happening right now and the lead up to that. Some think this unrest is just a result of what happened to George Floyd. The death by 1,000 cuts for me is because this is not something that, for me, it has come because of the death of George Floyd. This is something that has come from hundreds of years of a particular type of mentality where a particular group of people are valued over another particular group of people. A particular group of people's humanity, they're dehumanized over and over and over and over again. And that's that death by 1,000 cuts. That's why it really hit home for me, which is why to know it is one thing. To walk through life knowing this is one thing, but to see it as much as we are seeing it right now is another thing. And I know that, you know, for some, this is like an awakening, but for those who this is something that they have known always, this is just trauma on top of trauma on top of trauma. And it's like, when will it be enough? When will it stop? When will it stop?
One of the biggest things that I think, you know, is called into question right now that I think we're seeing firsthand with numerous things, whether it's the pandemic, race relations, you name it, is something, again, that I live by and I always try to implement is you can be a victim of circumstance and you can rise above it despite it, you know, because of it. Don't let that define you. And I think that obviously when we talk about certain aspects of society, it's hard to, you know, especially when race is involved, to de-institutionalize things that have been in the fabric of our nation for decades. Again, I do think that, especially right now in my immediate life, what I get to see with my department and why I am so grateful to know people like that, but also what I get to see with my friends, my family, is with everything going on, using your voice, leaning into your perspective, your experiences, and saying, hey, listen, I've been stopped by the cops. I've been, you know, I've been profiled. I've been X, Y, and Z, but that's not going to define who I am. You're going to forge your own path. And I think a lot of people right now are really leaning into that idea that, again, despite the obstacle, despite the challenges, that you can use your voice, you can use your passion and grow because of it and come out stronger in that ownership of not only your experiences, but not letting that define the course of your life.
The imagery that you brought to my mind, Terri, when you're like, it's trauma on top of trauma on top of trauma. That is what's happening, is it's layers and layers of trauma, from whether it's generational trauma or trauma from specific experiences. And thinking about trauma, I mean, everyone reacts differently to a traumatic experience, and trauma, it's subjective to that person. And so not knowing how people are going to react and being able to tune into that is so important, and listen, and also recognizing too of, especially right now, there's so many people who are working through that trauma on top of trauma on top of trauma in this community, and being able to recognize how that's also going to play off of each other. Something that like comes to my mind with it is using my own personal experiences. I remember that with my partner and I, the way we respond to the traumatic experiences that we've experienced is drastically different. And actually, our trauma responses trigger each other's trauma responses. And so we've had to be really aware of how we're responding and how we're reacting and how the other person's reacting, and have that open communication that doesn't necessarily always exist with everyone. That's where that other layer of, not only is it trauma on top of trauma on top of trauma for each individual person, but then you also have all of it stacked up together right next to each other, interacting, and it gets really complicated and murky, which makes having these conversations and recognizing that trauma and not judging how someone's responding so important. I know we've mentioned it like 5 times in this conversation of how important these conversations are, but that highlighted even more.
As we continue to navigate work, the world, family, and everything, we may continue to feel trauma come up. To acknowledge what you said, Terri, like what you're experiencing and feeling, it may continue to come up, and there's no certainty that it will end. I want to acknowledge what you said, Jason. And I thought about like what you said, Terri, at the beginning about not sitting in hopelessness. When we see someone that may look like us and seeing that violence enacted on them, and of course, historically, what has been going on, it impacts someone a specific type of way, how they navigate the world. But I also think that holding on to that hope that we as a community coming together, whether we have directly or indirectly experience something, and really being able to push for the change that we want to see, whatever that looks like, and acknowledging that we do come into even these spaces with diverse experiences and thoughts, but really being able to know and recognize like these experiences are valid. Jason, you were validating these different experiences, even when we all have different viewpoints or ways we perceive things. Just knowing that holding on to that hope is so important as we move forward.
Making space is really important. Even a space like this space right here, this space has allowed for us to have a particular type of community where Jason can say, despite everything, I feel hopeful. To me, that makes me feel good, because he is part of the future generation who's going to take that hope and try to make things better. But depending on the spaces that you go to, you may or may not get this kind of encouragement. The conversation comes from being able to have these spaces where you have to talk to people and you have to learn from people. It allows for us to have a particular type of growth intellectually as well as emotionally.
Yeah, I think having these conversations are important. A lot of people think that certain things only benefit one group or is only going to be for one group, but they don't realize this has a domino effect. Coming from a disability background and everything, one of the things I always say, disability does not know racism. Anyone, male, female, binary, trans, you can experience a disability. Car accident, boom, in a wheelchair. The important piece is having a conversation to hear, understand, empathize. And that's the piece where I think a lot of people don't want to take that extra step.
Thanks for tuning into the Narrative Project podcast.
We hope you all enjoy the dialogue we had today.
Please remember, should you need support from the CARE office, please call us at 949-824-7273 or email us at care@uci.edu. Our services are available to UCI students, staff, and faculty members Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. PST.
The UCI Counseling Center is available at 949-824-6457 and offers 24-hour access to counselors by phone.
And for Waymaker's 24-hour hotline, they can be contacted at 949-831-9110 in South Orange County or 714-957-2737 for North Orange County, and they can provide resources and referrals for survivors of sexual assault.
Human Auction's 24-hour hotline is available at 877-854-3594 and provides resources, safety, and support for individuals experiencing relationship abuse.
For those outside of Orange County, the National Sexual Assault Hotline can be reached at 1-800-656-4673 or through online chat at rainn.org. That's RAINN.org for resources and referrals for survivors of sexual assault.
And the National Domestic Violence Hotline can be reached at 1-800-799-7233 or through online chat at thehotline.org. That's THEHOTLINE.org for resources and referrals for survivors of individuals experiencing relationship abuse.
If you enjoyed listening to this episode, please be sure to share it with someone you know and join us for our next conversation. Bye for now.